thank you everybody once again for joining us tonight. Welcome to the March Madness College Basketball Reference webinar. We have a really great agenda planned for tonight. I guess kind of in the big picture, what we're going to do tonight is get you ready for March Madness. It tips off in about a week or so. It's one of my favorite sporting events on the calendar. It's always a great time, especially that first weekend when there are just this constant barrage of games happening at all hours. And I really enjoy it. So we want to make sure that you have you get the most out of this March Madness as possible. And one of the ways to do that is by being on College Basketball Reference. We have a wealth of advanced stats. We have some really cool March Madness records and pages for you to explore the history of the tournament. And starting this year, for the first time, we have stats for the women's game, for women's college basketball. So we are going to be showing all of that stuff. We have a really exciting announcement related to that as well. But before we dig into all this, I'll introduce myself and we'll introduce the panelists. So I'll just briefly, my name is Jonah, and I'm the product marketing manager here at Sports Reference. And I'm a big basketball fan, more of a pro basketball head than a college basketball person. So I have roped in two of our college basketball experts tonight to help me prepare my bracket, to help me dominate my friends, and when build a perfect bracket, I promise that I'll give them all a share of the $1 million, whatever you get when you build a perfect bracket. So let's start with Katie. Katie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at Sports Reference.
Hey everyone, my name's Katie Sharp, and I am the customer success manager for the Stathead product that we have, which is our subscription-based product. Right now, we only have it for all the professional sports, so NBA, MLB, NHL, NBA, but good news is we will be adding college sports later this spring and summer, in time for the fall. So really looking forward to that because I'm a huge college sports fan. I grew up in Connecticut, so my loyalties, obviously, I bleed blue. I like the Huskies, both the men and the women. So you may have interacted with me if you do subscribe to Stathead. So hello to anybody out there that I've emailed with or helped out at best.
And also joining us tonight is Mike.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming tonight. I'm Mike Lynch, the data director here at Sports Reference. So we're really excited with all of the new women's college basketball data that we've got. And on the men's side, I know that we have like the best collection of NCAA tournament history that's out there. We have a box score for every game in the history of the men's tournament back to 1939, with more data than you'll find in the Final Four record book and like official publications. We've worked really hard over the years to flesh out as much of that as possible. And we have all kinds of tools where you can access that, and you can find seed versus seed stuff, which I'm sure that we'll get into later. I'm a huge college basketball fan, not quite as into it as I was years ago, which would be explained by the fact that I'm a LaSalle Explorers fan. It's been a rough 30 some odd years, but like go Explorers, they won today, and maybe there'll be a Cinderella and sneak in. We'll see. They're probably going to need that auto bid, I guess. But like, thank you for joining us tonight.
So we've got full representation here. We've got Katie representing the Blue Bloods, the peak of college basketball, and we've got Mike holding it down for the mid-major, the Cinderella, the underdog. So we're gonna get you primed and ready for everything you need for the tournament. To start with, I'm going to share my screen. Sam, if you don't mind just giving me the permission to do that, I'm going to show us around the college basketball reference website a little bit. And as I do that, I guess I'll pick out some kind of big picture stuff, and then Katie and Mike, if you guys want to chime in at any point, or if there's any stuff you want me to point out while I'm doing it, go ahead and just let me know. Thanks, Sam, for setting that up. All right. So let me know. Does everyone see the screen with college basketball reference? Is that working correctly?
We're seeing Troy Murphy and Jerry West. Yep.
Yeah.
Adrian
All right. Perfect.
Dantley. There we go.
All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is take us through the newly added women's college basketball stats, because it's very exciting that we just added all this stuff. But also we have all of these pages as well for the men's side. So if you're curious about if you're looking for this stuff for a men's team, you'll be able to find this the exact same way as you do for a women's team. It's just a matter of toggling between the two. So as you can see here on the front page, we've got our sort of trademark, pictures of the athletes. We've got the standings for this season, the top 10 teams for both men's and women's basketball. And then we've got our scores down here. And as March Madness begins and progresses, you'll be able to take a look right here and just see all of yesterday's action, as well as the games that we have coming up today and into the future. In order to dig deeper into, say, this season of women's college basketball, there's a few different ways to do it. You can click on this button here that says summary, or you can go up here to the seasons tab, and then you can see there's the men and women. And I'll just go to summary to just kind of get us straight off to the start. And here you can see all of our conference data. And then if you scroll down, you can see all of our sort of big picture leaders for the stats. And then up here on this tab, you can navigate to some of the other pages we have for this season. So for example, if I click over here to school stats, I can see over here all of the schools stats in the basic stat categories. So here you can see wins and losses. Obviously South Carolina on top of that list. You can see strength of schedule and SRS. We'll probably dive into those quite a bit when we talk about bracket making, points for and against. And then up here you have your option to toggle between different ones. So you can see these are kind of the basic box score stats that the school scored or like put up. So these are the rebounds and these are the free throw percentage. But then you can also see what we call opponent stats. So these are the stats against them. So you can see the rebounds against, or the assists against, or points against. In addition to those basic stats.
Just one thing, Jonah,
yeah.
there, that just in case people are more wanting to see it on a per game level, there is that toggle there. Like if you want to see like the per game version of it too, which can be pretty useful.
Great point. Yeah, that's a lot more useful than the just raw sets that I was showing before. So you can click that red toggle up there per game to get that. Then we also have these advanced stats, and these are going to be ones that I think we'll talk about as well when we get into sort of the bracket portion of this, because you can see things like offensive rating, you can see free throw rate, 3-point rate, rebounding percentage, offensive rebounding percentage, which is one that I always look at a lot when I'm building my bracket. And then again, we have those same things for opponents. So that's what they're giving up. So you can see the 3-point attempt rate their defense allows, or the offensive rebounding rate that their opponents are pulling down, stuff like that. So those are the school stats. We also have these leaderboards, so you can go and kind of explore different leaders. And then we have this ratings page, which shows some advanced stats and team rating stats. So if you want to see how teams stack up outside of wins and losses, there's a few different stats that you can use for that. One is margin of victory. That's just like how many points did you beat your opponent by per game. But when you combine that with strength of schedule, you get a stat called SRS, which is better because it accounts for teams that maybe beat up on weaker opponents, or that maybe lost some close games to some really, really good opponents. So SRS lets you see kind of a more holistic view of team strength beyond margin of victory. We also have offensive and defensive net rating. And on this page, they're schedule adjusted. So you can actually see them adjusted for the strength of schedule. That's not the raw net rating. And again, that'll come in super handy when you're trying to look for underdogs or teams that may be underseeded, stuff like that. So let's see, there's a cool page that shows top 25 matchups. You can see how that has gone this year. We've got the history of the poll all season. So yeah, is there any other stuff on these pages, Mike or Katie, that you think I should be pointing out to people?
No, I mean,
Looks good.
I think that I assume that we'll probably get into it a little bit later, like about how you might use some of that information to build a bracket or like find
Mhm.
you know, identify sort of top tier teams that have what it takes to go all the way, or maybe like the Cinderella with a puncher's chance sort of thing.
Yeah, you know, let's
What
get into some of that now while we're talking about this stuff.
one
So
thing,
oh,
Jonah,
sorry, you
just
go
one
ahead,
thing I
Katie.
think that we should mention, and maybe you'll do it again, is that the share and export menu, which does allow you to download all of the information that you see in the tables. So that's actually available across the entire site. And it's a really useful tool because you can, if you click that get as Excel workbook button, that actually downloads directly to Excel. So you don't have to do any sort of cut and paste. It just opens up your Excel program that you already have installed on your computer. And if you don't have Excel, you can always use that get table as CSV link, which then converts it to a text format, which then you just easily copy and paste it and put it into, you know, whatever sort of spreadsheet program you're using, or maybe you're using R or something like that to look at the data. So I know that a lot of people like to, when they're building their brackets, they kind of like to just download all the data that they can get and then massage it and, you know, build algorithms and sort of prediction systems based on the data for all the teams. So
Yeah, and if you don't want all of the columns or rows on these tables, if there's only certain ones you're interested in, like certainly these tables will have every team, and maybe you're only interested in the 64 that make the tournament. You can click this one, modify, export, and share table, and you can close out whatever rows or columns you want to just get it down to the information you want before you export. Yeah. So yeah, why don't we got a lot of questions along these lines, you know, like what stats do you look at? What are some good predictors of team success? So yeah, for both of you, kind of what are a couple stats that people should be leaning on or at least paying attention to as they're building out their bracket, maybe especially if they're trying to predict kind of one of those, you know, 5-12, 4-13 type upsets?
well, I mean, I'll start off just with the upsets. Kind of what I like to do is you like to look at teams that play like a very high variance sort of style, like a high risk, high reward style. You don't want those safe teams that are just going to kind of, you know, make sure that they maybe, you know, win or lose by a few. You want those high risk, high reward teams. And so some of the characteristics of those teams that I really like to look at are basically maximizing the amount of possessions that they have and that the opponent doesn't have. So you want to be able to force a lot of turnovers. You want to be able to avoid turnovers on the offensive end. You want to grab a lot of offensive boards. Look at teams that have a high offensive rebounding percentage on offense. And then also limit opponents' offensive rebounds, because those are extra chances. Like those turnovers and offensive rebounds are extra chances that you can, extra possessions that you can get. And then also playing a slow tempo. It's kind of just a statistical theory. You know, the less chances that you give your opponent, if they're a better team, then the better chance that you actually have of pulling off that upset. And then kind of like staying with that high variance theme is maybe a team that's a really good 3-point shooting team, because the 3-pointer has changed the game. There's no doubt about it. And if a team can get hot from 3, that's a really good opportunity for them to be able to, like I said, maximize the possessions and to pull off that upset.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like finding a team that could pull an upset, I think like I would agree with a lot of what Katie said. One sort of wrinkle in regards to like the 3-point shooting, sometimes it's not even necessarily like a great 3-point shooting team, but a team that is committed to getting up a lot of threes, which may even like make them even more of like a real upset threat if they always shoot a lot of threes and like a lot of nights during the season they just weren't falling, and so they lost some games that they otherwise would have won if they shot more to their true ability, because the college season is really like short compared to the pros. Like sometimes, you've only got 25 or 30 games, for this stuff to sort itself out. So like some of these teams their true shooting ability could be better than what they've shown to this point. And so if they're getting up a lot of threes, and you want this sort of high variance style, if you're going to get up 30 plus threes, and they're falling that night, you could be pretty tough to beat as compared to like a more conservative team, that like focuses on twos and free throws and stuff that is a little bit more predictable. A lot of nights they may put up a better fight and only lose by 10 against the better team, and not lose by 30. But like they're also less likely to have those nights where they win those games. And sort of just like what Katie said, love teams that can force turnovers and get offensive rebounds, because those are extra shots that they could get that the other team won't get. Sometimes I'm a little bit uneasy about like a team that in like a very low conference gets a lot of offensive rebounds. Sometimes that could be a result of like the teams within their conference just don't have the size to defensive rebound. And then, they're a 14 seed out there against a Big Ten team that just has like a massive front line, where crashing the glass isn't necessarily going to work as well. But you can like sort of like look at teams that have those rebound rates and like, did they have any non-conference games against like sort of like bigger teams that rebound the ball well, and how well did it hold up in those games? And just one other thing that I'll throw in there, like you'll want to wait until the playing games are over before you fill in your bracket. Because a lot of times, I don't want to say that, and I know they're called what, the first four, not the playing game.
Yeah.
The teams that advance out of those games are very dangerous, because like the nervousness is over at that point. Come Thursday morning or Friday morning or whenever they play, they're ready to go. Like they've already gotten all of the nerves out. And so it's not uncommon that you see sort of like poorly seeded teams in that first four, just sort of sprint through that opening weekend. And, in the case of like a VCU, back in the day, they went all the way to the Final Four from there. And you've just seen like a lot of teams get all the way out of that first week, that came from the first four, where the seeds wouldn't make you think that they could get there.
Yeah, kind of, building off of what Mike said about that first four, a lot of times those 11 seeds can be very dangerous teams, because a lot of times they are from the Power 6 conferences, teams that were highly rated at the beginning of the season and then, just were incredibly disappointing during the regular season. Maybe they had some injury issues, they had some off-court issues, or they just failed to live up to expectations, but somehow they kind of just snuck in. And maybe it's a little bit of the pedigree. Yeah, I'm looking at like a Michigan State one on UCLA. I think that was either last year or a couple of years ago, where they do have that. And I'll also make this point, is that preseason poll rating is actually a very strong indicator of success in the NCAA tournament. I know that's not doesn't look true this year given UNC, North Carolina, but if you do kind of look historically at it, it is a pretty good predictor of teams that are going to do well in the NCAA tournament. So like I said, those 11 seeds in the first four, they can be really dangerous because like, they're coming from a Power Six team and maybe they only, maybe they finished 500 in their conference, but they do have that talent. They have that pedigree that will probably made them very highly rated at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, all of that is really interesting. So kind of thinking about what y'all were saying and just kind of looking as I was like resorting these stats as we were talking about it, I was surprised to notice you see kind of, and these are again the women's teams, you see some teams that will clearly be underdogs in a lot of their early matchups. But you also see Florida Gulf Coast up here, and they're one of the stronger teams this year, but they don't have the pedigree of like a South Carolina or a UConn. But I see a lot of these positive indicators, the sort of slower pace, the high 3-point attempt rate, the high steal rate. And it just occurs to me thinking about it that like that's kind of Florida Gulf Coast thing, is like trying to make noise in the tournament, trying to build teams that go far in the tournament in order to attract more recruits and raise awareness of their school. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, since Katie mentioned the preseason poll, that back on that polls page, we have the preseason poll. So if you want to use that to kind of go back to and as another sort of source as you're building out your bracket, I think that's a really good resource to have. So that's really good stuff. So I want to very quickly show the player pages, and instead of going to someone from this year, I want to point out that we just recently, just today, dropped a new addition to our women's side of the college basketball site. So now we have stats all the way back to the 2001-2002 season, which means that legends like Diana Taurasi now have at least a substantial part of their college stats on our website. So here you can see the historic record of her statistics. And I just want to point out that in addition to the traditional per game, the stuff you expect, we have totals, we have per 40 minutes, per 100 possessions. We've got these a little bit of the advanced stats. We have them far more in depth for more recent players. So if you look at like Maddie Segrist this year, you would see some advanced stats for her. In addition to that, we've got game logs, so you can see game by game stats for players, and we have split stats, so you can see their splits. So any other stuff along these lines that I should point out before we get into kind of the historical March Madness coverage? All right, I'm gonna move us along then. So up here on this top menu, you can see very different. Sorry, my dog is currently eating my laptop cover, so I had to intervene there for a moment. As I was saying, on this top bar, you can see different sections. One of them is NCAA tournaments. And this takes you to our sort of NCAA tournament history. You can toggle between the men and women's tournament, and you'll see the champion, you'll see the most outstanding player for that year. We have NIT history as well. You can see when it's been vacated. And as you can see, as Mike was saying, our records of these on the men's side are quite extensive. We have box scores for every single game in here. So if you want to go back and take a look at this 1939 Villanova versus Ohio State game, looks like it was a real barn burner. You can do that. We also obviously have more recent stuff. So if you want to go back and look at last year's women's tournament, we've got the full bracket, the all tournament team, the all regions teams, and kind of a breakdown of the tournament by region, and then that big exciting Final Four. And then Mike, what's some other stuff that I should be taking people to?
So I get, should we look at what is in the play index? I know that will be going to Stathead at some point, but it's a great tool to sort of research. If a player has a great game, it's a great place to go. And if you're researching sort of to build your bracket, the NCAA tournament matchup finder is a really cool tool right there. And so this is a way, like, if you want to find out every 5 versus 12 matchup in the history of the tournament, this is a place to do it. Or if you just want to find every 12 seed that beat a 5, you could do that here. You could search for like the biggest margin of victory that a 5 has ever, or that a 12 has had versus a 5. Or, and I should add, it's not like you can only do 12 versus 5. That's just sort of like generally one of those like marquee sort of matchups. You could find any matchup between any number of seeds or sort of range of seeds, all the way back to the start of the tournament in 1939. If you're not interested in the like older stuff, you know, you could set it to more recent years. I'll also add that seeds did not exist in the tournament until 1979, I believe it was. So if you're searching for 5 seeds, you know, that will automatically limit you to the last 44 years or so. You know, you can look for schools by conference, schools by name. You could even look for like the location, you know, if you want to see like how Duke fares in games in the state of North Carolina, and like things like that. Like, can anyone ever beat them there? Even like, what is it? What's like the UConn thing, Katie? Is it anytime that they get sent west or something that they do great or something? I might be
I think
misremembering
it was
that,
in their I think it was in the West region. They've won maybe twice or something.
Okay. So just sort of fun things like that. You know, there's all sorts of filters and options. And so like, yeah, it's a cool way to just sort of play around with like the history of how various teams and seeds and conferences have fared.
Yeah, one thing I'll add there is on this matchup finder page, we just have kind of the, you know, the basic points and opponent points and like point differential stats. But if you wanted to look at more specific box score stats, we do have NCAA tournament, an NCAA tournament game filter in the team game finder. Now that only goes back to
2010, 11, right?
2010, 11. But for more, you know, that's, you know, for more recent tournaments, if you kind of want to look at some trends or look up some historical stats, that can be a really cool tool to use to look at, you know, number of assists or field goal percentages, and different field goal percentage differentials, things like that. So we have all of those stats. Obviously it's not, it doesn't have the seedings, but it does have more stats that you can sort on. And you can specifically filter for that NCAA tournament. You showed that, right?
Yeah, I turned it on over here. It's over in game type. One thing I did want to mention before we as we kind of move into that play index part. Right now, we only have men's stats in the play index. When this gets converted to Stathead for next season, we will have women's stats in here as well. But since it's being converted, they're not in there now, but they will be when this becomes Stathead. So I just wanted to underline that for people in case they come in here trying to find that stuff. Yeah. In addition to those, I think that we also have an NCAA tournament player game finder. And this is really cool because since we have some of those box scores back to 39, there are actually some stats that you can search all the way back to there. Other stats you can get more recently, like the starter reserve designation. We have back to 1977 for all tournament games, back to 55 for the Final Four. You've got these position filters, and again, you can sort by player stats. So if I don't know, I guess, well, I'm thinking Florida Gulf Coast. If one of those players goes off and you're like, I wonder if that's the Florida Gulf Coast NCAA tournament record, you can easily look that up and see on there. Or if anyone does that against a school, if someone really puts like 40 on Duke and you're like, man, I wonder if that's ever happened in the tournament before, you can look that up in here as well. And it would be the first time since 1978 someone had done that. So that's another cool tool. It isn't really going to help you as much with your bracket building, but once we're in the tournament, it's a fun thing to play around with. And then in addition to that, I wanted to kind of take us down here to the frivolity section, because speaking of ways to follow the tournament, once it's going, we are going to have our NCAA tournament forecast up and running. And what this does is, as you can see, it'll show you the odds of every team to make it to the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, the Final Four, and the National Championship. So this is a fun thing to check in on. It'll be up before the tournament starts. We'll run a simulation so you can see kind of those odds, and then every day it changes based on the results of March Madness. So I think that's a really fun kind of like feature thing.
And
That
look at that. We had Kansas's 100% chance to win last year. So I mean, this is really all you need.
not only that, we got the final four exactly right too. That's crazy.
Yep. Uncanny. Just for clarity's sake, this is because it gets
Yeah.
updated after every day of the tournament. That would be why all those percentages change. But it had me there for a second. I was like, wow.
It'll be a lot less certain of what's going to happen in about a week or so when we turn it on. So yeah, good good call out there.
All right. Of course, we knew that St. Peter's had 100% chance to reach the Elite Eight. Is that right?
Exactly.
Oh yeah, I could have told you this. I could have told you all that, you know, way back when the season started last year. Right? We didn't need the forecast for that. All right. Is there any other stuff on the site that I should show, or do you want to get into the Q&A?
I think you should show them the buzzer beaters page.
Oh yeah, good call.
Yeah.
So yeah, also
Right
here on
there.
the frivolities, we have every March Madness buzzer beater. And you can see the margin, the time, the type, who assisted it, if it was assisted, game stats, for the player who shot it. This is extremely cool. You can filter it by round. You can filter it by team, or sort, I guess, by team. This is an awesome page. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there's going to be hopefully some buzzer beaters. It looks like there haven't been very many in the last couple years, but
Yeah, last year was a little weak. That Jalen Suggs one was an
Yeah.
all-timer though.
yeah,
So it made up for the otherwise lack of them that year. And then there was no tournament in 2020, I guess. Unfortunately,
that's true. Yeah,
rather not remember that, I guess. But and that feature is currently just for men's as well, but it's like something that we would also like to add for the women's tournament.
Yeah,
and
just to know, like, that's almost all manual stuff that we've done. We've had some tremendous research done spearheaded there by Mike, who's gone through, you watching videos. And so this is real. This is not just some sort of computer program that's spitting out these buzzer beaters.
yeah, it's the same. We have a similar list on the basketball reference page for the NBA, and it's it's a really staggering and awesome research project that created it. And then in addition to that, we've got the biggest upsets, if you're curious about that, although obviously you can also get a lot of this stuff in the play index.
Well, those are by point spreads, so that's not in the
yeah,
play index.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something we added last year, which is pretty cool.
I believe that goes back to to the expansion of the 64 team field in 1985, I believe. Just want to give a thank to Bob Vitrone Jr. For like getting us that information. It's a really cool list.
Yeah, and as you can see, like, it's a little counterintuitive that the 16-1 famous UVA defeat at the hands of UMBC is not the biggest upset on this list. That Norfolk State beating Missouri was actually about a half point higher on the spread. So that's very interesting.
Kyle O'Quinn, trust the process.
Right.
All right. Are you all ready to move on to the Q&A? Is there anything else that we
and then
missed?
that Santa Clara one there involves Steve Nash too. He hit the free throws to ice that one.
Oh wow. I'm gonna pull up the box score for that.
He was a true freshman, if I recall correctly.
There he is. 30 minutes. 1 of 7 from the field, but 8 of 10 from the free throw line.
Yeah, beat that Khalid Reese. Yeah,
All
awesome.
right.
In a day.
So we solicited questions in advance from people who RSVP'd. And also, if you have any questions while we're talking, if any of this stuff has given you any sort of curiosity, go ahead into the chat and just submit a question there, and we'll be happy to answer it. So let's see. So the first question. So we talked about some of these. I guess one thing that I always struggle with when I'm building out my bracket, and I'm curious about y'all's opinion. How much do you factor in the team that has the best player versus sort of these other factors that we're talking about. Because I know a lot of the time I end up getting myself into trouble by picking like the team with the top NBA prospect, and obviously Victor Wembanyama, the number one prospect's not in the tournament this year. But like sometimes I can be like, oh, I recognize this guy from draft boards, so I'm going to pick his team to go far, and then they bomb out in the first round. So how do you approach a team with NBA talent versus one with maybe more experience?
I mean, I think that it definitely helps to have some pros, but I wouldn't necessarily be hung up on like, the team with the best player is going to advance. Yeah, that's just not the way that it seems to generally work in March Madness. In looking at this, like in the last like 20 years or so, I think there's only like two times where the national champ has had like the national player of the year. And those two players are sort of opposite ends of like the national player of the year spectrum. Like one of those two is Anthony Davis with 2012 Kentucky, where he was the national player of the year. They were the best team, and he was like the best prospect. And that was a loaded team. There was like a lot of very early picks. MKG went very early in that same draft, and they had some more veteran guys that could really play too. And then the other instance of that was Jalen Brunson, who was like just like a perfect college point guard who like the pro scouts had a lot of questions about his lack of size and lack of athleticism. So he fell all the way into the second round, and has turned himself into like a borderline all-star sort of player now. But aside from, and that was with Villanova when they won for the second time, for the second time in that 3-year window, was when Brunson was a junior there. I believe he also won a title as sort of like more of a role player as a freshman. But every other year in there, that there's been some very good players on champions, but not like a national player of the year sort of guy. Psycho T, I guess, would be one example where he was the national player of the year, like the year before they finally won it in 09. That they had like a lot of sort of heartbreak before they broke through in 2009. But yeah, generally, like to go before that, like you sort of have to go back to like when Duke had Battier and Jay Williams and stuff, which was like a little over 20 years ago. It maybe used to be more common than it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo a lot of what Mike said in that you want to have pros, but you don't necessarily have to have like the best player on the court. But statistically speaking, I believe that, if you don't have if you don't have guys that are going to be drafted, you're going to have a tough time getting to the Final Four and winning a national championship. But you don't necessarily have to have that number one pick or that a super, super elite player. So I think I would, if you're picking, kind of trying to pick pick your bracket, I would look for teams that do have that talent, but I would avoid teams that are extremely reliant on one player, where that one player is sort of the outlier on a team. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, even if you just look at the regular season, you can see some of the teams. I mean, where maybe they have a lottery pick, but they were under 500 in conference play. So that's the one caveat that I may, that might be true is that if you're looking at a mid-major team, you definitely want to have a guy that is a talent, I think, that can maybe take over a game and kind of have like that quintessential performance if you're looking for some upset. So that's kind of one little thing I like to look at. I really haven't dug into any of the historical stats on that or any sort of correlations. But to me, it just seems like if you do have that one alpha dog on a mid-major team, that you probably have a better chance of pulling off an upset than if you don't.
That's great. So moving on, James has been asking about how to find sort of like a global list of player stats, so not just from one conference, but from all of D1. So I wanted to show very briefly how to get that in the play index. It's not quite, because he's talking about exporting the full set, which I think you're going to have to go through a couple of pages. But one of the play index tools we didn't touch on is the player season finder. And if you go to the player season finder and set 22, 23, you can sort by leaders in any of the stats that we have on the site. So I can't remember. I think he mentioned 3-pointers maybe as one of the stats. So if you click 22, 23, as I did in the season, sort by 3-pointers, get results. What this is going to give me is a list of every player in Division 1 on the men's side, sorted by the most threes. Now, this only gives you the top 100 at a time. So to get every single player, you're going to have to scroll back through a few pages of the list. And you're going to have to share and export and download each table one by one if you're trying to download them. But that sounds faster than going conference by conference, which is what James said he had been doing before. So I just wanted to shout that out for him. A little bonus how-to there on the play index. And of course, that will be in Stathead next fall. So the next question I have for y'all is I guess kind of taking it from more general to more specific. Are there any teams on either the men's or the women's side, maybe sort of off the beaten path that you're targeting? Maybe teams, and obviously it hasn't been Selection Sunday yet, but are there any teams that you're already like thinking like, oh, I'm looking forward to picking them as an early upset, or I think they can make a much deeper run than maybe the consensus thinks?
On the men's side, oh, you go ahead, Katie.
You go, Mike. I'll chime in and probably get different ones anyways.
A couple teams on the men's side that I'm assuming that if they get in, that they will be trendy, like chalky kind of upset picks. So maybe they're not what you're looking for, but like I wouldn't want to not mention them. Like College of Charleston is at 30-3. They're top 10 in the country in 3-point attempt rate. So if they're hitting those, they're going to be dangerous. They got 5 guys scoring in double figures and a 6th guy who was like almost there. So like you need to like account for a lot of different guys that can hurt you. So they could just be a tough team to play. They've won 30 games already. And then Furman is another team like that. I think they've won 27 games or so already. And just a lot of guys that can hurt you, shoot a lot of threes. And it's just like, there's theories out there that all a defense can do is take the 3-point shot away from you, and that they can't necessarily influence how many of them go in or out. I don't know if I buy that theory whole hog, but there's certainly something to it. Like you can alter a 2-point shot probably more so than you can alter a 3-point shot that like makes sense, right? And so you would expect that whoever these teams play, that they're going to get their threes up, and once they do, it's sort of out of the other team's control a bit. If Charleston is going to hit 15 or 23s on you, they're going to be very hard to beat, and it's just like a little bit harder to take away, especially for certain teams that maybe aren't used to seeing a style like that.
Yeah, actually, Furman was one of the ones that I was going to mention as well. I think another interesting one would be Penn State if they do make the tournament. Right now they're one of those bubble teams, and they could end up, like I said, on that 11 seed, the 11-11 first 4 game, and they're really dangerous. They play at an extremely slow pace. They hit a ton of 3-pointers, and they also force a lot. They have a very low turnover percentage, so they don't turn the ball over. So they're really maximizing their possessions. And also, of course, excuse me, I don't know how much stock you place in it, but they did play in the Big Ten, obviously. So pretty battle tested. And they've beaten some really good teams. And then one other thing that they do have, that they have Jalen Pickett, who is an extremely, lead guard. And I believe that is one of the key things you have to have in order to advance in the tournament, is you got to have guards. You got to have good guards. And right now he's a potential All-American guard. And so I think Penn State, another one maybe is VCU, which just recently they won the they're looking like they're gonna probably get in the tournament regardless of whether they win the tournament, of whether they win their conference. But they have an extremely good defense. They force a lot of turnovers, and they have and I think so. The one thing that is holding them back is sort of their offense. But yeah, VCU and Penn State would be two other kind of lower, probably teams that are going to be double-digit seeds that could make a run in the tournament.
And on the women's side, I wanted to point out Florida Gulf Coast. I talked about them already, but threes, good, like slower pace to control the tempo, steals, very high assist rate. They share the ball a lot. And the 30-3 record is obviously quite impressive. I also, when I was kind of like exploring on there, I noticed Tennessee is 13th in SRS, but they're unranked, and they were actually ranked 5th to start the season. Now they're unranked, 13th in SRS. Kind of looks like one of those things Katie was talking about earlier, where the preseason poll, maybe things went wrong for them a little bit, but the underlying numbers look good there. So those are some good teams. So let's see. We're coming down to the end here, so I had a couple more fun questions for y'all. One of the questions we got in the I guess these two questions are kind of a nice pair, and give you a chance for a hot take or two. Harold asked us whether there are too many teams in the tournament, and if a team should have to win their tournament or have at least a 500 record in the conference or something to get in, if there should be stricter rules. Dennis asked if the tournament needed to expand, if there weren't enough teams in the tournament. Where are you all at on the, I guess, 68? If I know every year it seems like they're talking about expansion. Do you think it's too many? Do you think it's right where it is now? Yeah.
I'll go first, I guess. I feel like there's like sort of something magical about that 64 number, and we can all sort of pretend that the tournament doesn't actually start until Thursday morning. That the things that happen Tuesday and Wednesday night are just sort of whetting our appetite, and like filling out the bracket for 64 is so great. Like the mix of teams is generally pretty good. I really like it the way that it is. Based upon everything that I've read, it's just a matter of time before it gets a lot larger, which I'll lament a bit, but I guess it's not like I'm going to stop watching. I just think that it's at a great size right now.
Yeah, I'm with Mike. I'm pretty much anti-expansion. I love what it is right now. I don't want to see, because what I've heard is that if we do expand it, a lot of what will happen is just you'll get a ton more of these Power 5 or Power 6 teams that just were terrible. Like they were just so disappointing during the season. And so like that's not what I want if it's going to expand. So I am pretty much anti-expansion. I think it's a good number right now. You got the good mix of the conference champions. So you got those the Cinderella possibilities there. But then you also get teams, like I said, that, from the Power 6 conferences that, maybe have disappointed a little bit during the season, had some issues, but do have that elite talent that you love to see and that can produce some great games and some great performances.
As a soccer fan who is dreading the 48 team World Cup that we have coming in 2026, I definitely agree that these big tournaments should just leave well enough alone. But obviously there's too much money at stake to not push towards that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I would prefer to see more mid majors get in and fewer of these mediocre teams from the power conferences, because people talk about those mid-major resumes that are maybe lacking. Well, the fact of the matter is they're given very few chances to build their resumes, because the big boys don't want to play them anymore. They're scared of them, so they schedule 20 conference games and things like that. And then things where the big conferences play each other, and so they're not really like exposing themselves, and so it becomes very tough for those smaller schools to build a resume. So I always feel bad when there's one of these small conference schools that is like something like 29-4 and 17-1 in conference, and then they lose in the semifinals of their conference tournament on a fluke, and it's like, well, sorry, you don't have any quad one wins, we're not going to let you in. It's like, well, how were they supposed to get any quad one wins? They won't schedule them. So just a frustration of mine. Yeah, but we don't need more teams that went like 6-12 in a big conference,
Right. Yeah.
to like get in there,
I don't need to see those teams just play badly anymore. I like to see good. I like to see good teams play. You know what I mean? Teams that know how to win.
I asked for a hot take and we got one. I want to see good teams in the tournament. That is a scorcher.
There you go. Put me down up for that one.
So we only have time for one last question, and Ben asked us to tell a little bit about ourselves. So I feel like that's maybe an appropriate note to end on. So why don't you guys just talk a little bit about your background, how you ended up coming to work for Sports Reference, and maybe, I don't know, one formative sports experience when you were a kid or growing up or something. I'll start, since I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. So I came to Sports Reference in 2015. I was joining to be our social media manager. So I'd worked in social media at the time, but I hadn't done any sports. I just applied for the job when I was living in Austin, and ended up interviewing, and it was like, oh, I use the site every day. I would love to work there, and have been working here ever since. It's a really wonderful place to work. And I guess my formative sports experience will be, I moved to Atlanta with my family when I was 7, which just happened to be 1995, the year that they won the World Series. So I was like, this is great. I just moved to a city and root for a team. They win the title. This is what the rest of my life is going to be like. And then it was a long wait for a team that I rooted for to win another title. But that was really fun. And then I guess the less fun one was when the Hornets moved away from Charlotte after we moved to Charlotte. But in a way that was liberating, because then I could just root for the NBA players I like and not be tied down to a team. So that's me. I'm not sure if either of you want to go or yeah.
So I've been a Sports Reference for the better part of a decade now, and before that, spent about a decade like doing sports TV, research and script writing and things like that. As far as like the NCAA tournament goes, like the kind of person I am, I love March Madness. When my kids were babies and they were having a hard time sleeping, and you got to sort of rock them back to sleep, I knew that the right amount of time had passed when I'm walking around rocking them back and forth across the room, when I had named all of the NCAA tournament champions, 1939 up to the present, and then the present back to 1939. Then they're asleep and I lay them down. And so it always worked like a charm. Until I stepped on a floorboard when I was walking out the door, and I woke them back up. But and then the process had to start over again.
That's a great story, Mike. So I've been at Sports Reference for 2 years now, and my background is very similar to Mike's. I worked for almost 10 years in sports television as well. I was actually at ESPN with Mike. We worked together, sat side by side there as researchers for various shows. So I worked at ESPN for a while, and then also did a lot of freelance work, writing about sports and editing sports in between my time after I left ESPN and then joined Sports Reference. I guess growing up in Connecticut, I've always been a huge college basketball fan. I mean, we don't really have any pro sports in my hometown. So it's always been college basketball for me as far as I can remember. And I don't really know if I have any sort of definitive sports experience, because sports is basically the only thing that I've ever remembered from my first memory of my life. I guess I can blame my dad for that. So I just it's just always been an enormous part of my life, and sports statistics has always been one of my passions ever since I was a little kid.
What you're saying is that between UConn and the Yankees, you're just bored with winning. You're just so tired of rooting for a winner every year. It just gets old after a while.
It never gets old, and it's been way too long. I mean, more than a decade now, for almost 15 years, gosh, for the Yankees. More than 5 years for UConn. So no, I kid. I do root for some good teams, but I'm very passionate, and I was fans back when they were not good. So I've been a diehard fan for a while.
So there you go. Two college basketball experts and me. We really appreciate you all hanging out with us tonight. We hope this was informative. And we hope that now you have everything you need to tackle the bracket when the seeds come out next week. Again, that's College Basketball Reference is the name of the website, and it has all of the information you need to find. That sports-reference.com/CBB. And men's, women's, historical stuff, these Plandex tools, all that stuff is there for you to explore and have fun with. So thank you all again so much for tuning in tonight, and for your really interesting questions. And we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and let's do this again next year.